Hello and welcome to this podcast. I am Hemant Singh and this is the Delhi Policy Group. Over the past 2 decades, India and the United States have invested considerable political will and diplomatic capital in strengthening a strategic partnership that is vital to both countries. This trajectory has witnessed a significant setback over the past months, with the U.S. administration's resort to aggressive economic leverage and imposition of high tariffs against India. On the 2nd of February, the framework for an interim India-U.S. trade agreement was finally announced, which is likely to be concretized in the coming weeks. But questions still remain about the nature of the commitments that have been made by either side and their implications. Meanwhile, India has stepped up efforts to diversify its economic partnerships, including by concluding a long pending FTA with the European Union. To discuss these and related issues, I am joined in this podcast by Dr. V.S. Seshadri, our Senior Fellow for Economic Security. Dr. Seshadri, warm welcome to you. Let me open the questions with three sets which are part of the same. One is that what is the economic and strategic significance you see of this interim trade deal? And of course, do you think that this has closed the chapter on the recent economic dissonance between the two countries? Or is this just a temporary de-escalation? And why did the process take so long in the first place?
Yes, in my view, it is a significant move forward because, after all, U.S. is our largest export destination, and it comprises almost 20% of our exports. And to the extent, therefore, we can get stability and predictability for our exporters to be able to export, it's extremely important. And that was missing during the last several months, when tariffs up to the level of 50% additional tariffs were being imposed on Indian exports to the US. Now, you have talked about the strategic importance of this agreement. Indeed, very strategic, but you've also talked about the dissonance. That crept in when India was more or less singled out for the highest level of tariff that was posed on any country, a 25% reciprocal duty plus a 25% tariff on account of purchase of Russian oil. Now that was prohibited, and that indeed raised questions about the relationship. Particularly when you see in the last 2 decades or so, the steady accretion of trust, of the widening of the partnership from both sides. Particularly, even on the trade front, if you recall, the two sides settled 7 trade disputes in the last few years. So in that backdrop, this sudden turnaround in the tariffs became quite a difficult situation to deal with. And why did it take so long? I have a feeling, I could be wrong, because after all, this administration is on leveraging, as you mentioned, and they were trying to see if they could make some inroads into what were our announced red lines, which from their point of view perhaps was important, but all the same for us, those were red lines. And I think it became fairly evident to them when we started concluding FTAs with UK, with New Zealand, and then finally with the European Union, when all these red lines were carved out of the FTA deals. It became very evident that India is firm on this. So I think rather than let situation go down further, And I think they came to an assessment that it may be better to conclude this rather than let it go differently. I think that would be my assessment.
Thank you, Sesh. Clearly, as you say, there is short-term relief for India, albeit it comes with the strings attached. Can we now delineate what, in your views, are the key benefits which India would derive from this interim agreement when it comes about? And do you think this is setting a rather low threshold? Could we have done better?
Yes. First of all, I think the 18% tariff places us on a level playing field, as it were, with fellow competitor countries like in Southeast Asia or even in South Asia, who have 19% or 20% thereabouts in terms of additional duty. And I'm talking particularly about the labor-intensive items like textiles, leather goods, as also chemicals, machinery, etc. And all these items, it has been reduced to 18%. And I think our negotiators have also been able to get a 0% tariff on diamonds, which is very, very important, because an 18% additional tariff on diamonds would really harm the trade very much, because these are high value items. And I think you also have to give credit to them that they have been able to obtain some preferential tariffs on automotive parts, which again is a plus. There are also certain items on which U.S. had imposed tariffs not on reciprocal duty grounds, but on security grounds like steel, aluminium, etc. Now, there again, I think we have been able to get some inroads, make some inroads, particularly in terms of steel and aluminium, which will be used for their aircraft industry. Of course, it's mainly benefiting them as well. Likewise, I think there will be zero duties on generics, which again is a big export item for us, so that will be a plus. There are therefore these additional points, including some agricultural products, spices, etc., which again have been taken off because of demand from the U.S. domestic, constituencies, because prices were going up. But nevertheless, this gives a little more, you can say, predictability to this whole regime, where certain part will be 18% tariffs, certain parts there will be no reciprocal duty additionally, and certain parts where even on the economic security grounds you get exemptions. So these are certainly pluses. Now, you have asked whether we could have done better. Now, one area which obviously, because few days after the bilateral trade agreement, our interim or rather framework was announced, we saw the conclusion of the Bangladesh-U.S. trade deal, which allowed Bangladesh a certain special dispensation if they were to import U.S. Cotton or man-made fabrics, then they could export a proportional amount. We don't know that proportion, they haven't yet determined it, but they could do it with zero duties. Now that would cut into our competition. Subsequently, our Minister for Commerce, Mr. Piyush Goyal, has clarified that India would receive a similar dispensation. Now we will have to wait and see when the interim agreement gets thrashed out, what will be this component that we will get instead, because let's be clear, our import of U.S. cotton, last 2 years, for example, if you take an average, it is about $230, $240 million. So it's not small. Mm-hmm. So we could therefore think of some package there which would also benefit our textile and garment industry. Now, another area where we could have done better is what the tariff dispensation has been obtained by countries like, economies like EU, Japan, Korea, and most recently Taiwan. Because let's be clear, this reciprocal duty that has been announced, 18%, will be added on to the MFN duty. That is the normal duty prevailing in the United States. Whereas in the case of these countries that I mentioned, the dispensation that they have got is 15% reciprocal duty or MFN, whichever is higher. So you can see they have made a distinction between a certain group of countries and certain other group of countries. Now, I would have thought that India, being a comprehensive strategic partner with the US, a Quad member, of which Japan and Australia are also members, should we have got a better deal? I hope our negotiators will still be able to, during the process of finalizing the agreement, may be able to secure something on that front. That will be very useful.
Okay, so one thing which we can take away is that a kind of a bottom has been now set. We can't fall further in the trading relationship, which is it's hopefully going to keep moving forward. At least the trade statistics show that trade is pretty much moving along between India and the United States, keeping its regular levels fairly close to what was the case a year prior. Let me move on to the next question. What, in your view, are the key concessions and commitments which we have made for the United States? And are these fairly balanced and sustainable?
In this whole context, balance is as perceived by the United States. And this is something that every country has had to contend with. In terms of what we have granted to the US reciprocally, I think we have agreed to eliminate or reduce tariffs on all industrial goods and a good lot of agricultural products, while at the same time keeping away from any such concession some of the sensitive items for us, like dairy products, poultry products, cereals, and several other items in that category. Meat is another one which we have kept out, I understand. So these are all areas which were very, very important for our farm sector, and I think government has been able to keep out. Even in respect of the other items, where I mentioned duty elimination or reduction, there are sensitive sectors like automobiles, for example. I understand in respect of those items, or for that matter, alcoholic beverages. I understand that in respect of those items, they have followed some TRQs and quotas, etc. The final details will be available only when the final agreement is available, interim agreement. So we will have to wait and see for that. And on non-tariff barriers, both sides have agreed to cooperate on several non-tariff barriers. We will have to again wait and see what the specifics are, because those are not spelled out in too much details. And additionally, India has also made a commitment to purchase US dollars 500 billion of US products for the next 5 years. These include a whole host of items, including energy products, including perhaps the nuclear equipment, including also aircrafts and aircraft parts, etc. Defense items form another important item. Now, if you look at this, it will come to US dollars 100 billion per year. Now, at the moment, our imports from the US are on average about 40 billion plus. So, additional imports already you can see taking place, particularly energy items, etc., or defense items. This will certainly help to enhance the trade. Plus, I understand, because of our own agenda in terms of moving forward on the industrial front, tech front, data centers. We are going to establish a lot of data centers. We are in the process of establishing semiconductor plants. So all these will require certain capital equipment, certain other continued supplies of, like for example, high-grade semiconductors, graphic processing units, etc. So these again will be additional aspects that will come in. Nuclear plants again is another item. So one can envisage the imports going up significantly. But whether they will go up to a 100 billion figure, we will have to wait and see. But the language is India intends to purchase. So I guess we have given an indicative figure, which should be fairly comforting to the other side, particularly when they are looking at reciprocity as a key element in the trade. But I think this is forward looking. Let's see how it goes.
Well, in any case, we have a very ambitious agenda because I thought that we had agreed last year to enhance trade to $500 billion by the end of the decade. So maybe this is going to be gradual, but still a move in the right direction. Now, my next question is about the interim agreement. You know that it is still to be finalized and hopefully it will be done. Do you think that it will be done in the next few weeks? And are there areas which you would like to see better clarified when the text of that agreement comes out?
Our team is proceeding to U.S. next week, I understand, led by the chief negotiator. And one can see from the statements from both sides that they are keen to move forward and put this, what has happened in the past, behind. Yeah. So if that is the spirit, and if they don't want to waste any further time, I guess it would come out. But as I said already earlier, there are one or two issues where we can still try to get what could be possible. That is one I said in terms of textile quota, I already mentioned that. Similarly, in terms of the tariff dispensation, 18% or MFN, whichever is higher. Here again, even if they think that it may not be fair to other competitor countries like Southeast Asian countries, etc., to be giving India this dispensation on labor-intensive products. Perhaps they could focus on at least non-labor-intensive products. That would give a similar dispensation. So it puts us on par with comprehensive strategic partnership, particularly on tech areas, etc. I think that would be a very, very important signal. But more important than that is I think whether there will be attempts by the U.S. side to see that some of their measures that they are taking on economic security front or in terms of standards, they would like to see export of them. That's normally the U.S. Position, and see that included in the agreement. I think it will be very, very premature for us to do that, particularly on issues like digital trade, where you could see they have already made a kind of expression by including something initially in the fact sheet, but later on that was dropped. So these are areas that might be of particular interest to them. I think our negotiators will be well advised to stay off course from those kind of areas, which will lead a lot of discussion. It is not so simple in terms of aligning standards, etc. It will lead granular, agreement between the two sides at the sectoral level.
Okay, that's very helpful. The related question which I wanted to ask is that we have a certain degree of opening in terms of market access, but are there any other areas of particular importance coming out of this interim agreement which might spur wider India-US economic cooperation?
I think the several areas that are obvious candidates for such cooperation beyond market access, but closely related to trade, are in terms of supply chains, because easier trade should spur more supply chain hubs where India also acquires a crucial part. So I hope this project that we are in the midst of, in terms of having now greater stability and predictability of trade with the US, simultaneously with signing an FTA, signing FTAs with a whole lot of other countries. This gives a very good grouping in terms of possible supply chains that you can build, including the countries with which we already have FTAs. So we therefore have something that we can build on. Critical minerals, for example, is one such area. And it is very welcome that in the last few weeks, we have now been included as member of Pact Silica. And just 2 weeks ago, our External Affairs Minister also was in Washington, D.C., attending the Critical Minerals Ministerial meeting, where a whole host of countries were invited. But the broad objective of that meeting, and also you have to take this into account certainly, because US is proceeding in a big way in making investments, both public, private, and spurring other countries to do so in the critical minerals area, because it has been quite unhappy with the manner in which this has been used as a leverage by other countries. So I think it will be very important for India also to become a part of this larger partnership. So if this interim agreement and hopefully the move forward to a BTA spurs greater cooperation on that front, I think that will be a great contribution.
Well, I'm glad to hear that clarification on that point. Now, areas of concern. Are there any particular areas of concern in the announcements which have been made so far, which impinge on India's sovereign decision making, for instance, regulatory standards? And clearly, we do have a lingering issue with the question of Indian energy imports being treated as somehow related to US national security interests, which can re-emerge to impinge further problems for us.
I think here we have to go by the statements given by the Ministry of External Affairs very clearly, where they have said two important aspects there. One is that these are commercial decisions taken by our businesses. Two, and to whatever extent it is the government is involved, national interests will guide decision making in these areas. So we will have to broadly go by that, I would imagine. But here, areas of concern, particularly I draw from the reciprocal trade agreement that have been entered into by the US with third countries. In fact, if you look at some of the provisions there, they are quite, you can say, to be avoided. Because, as I earlier mentioned, there is this penchant in the US to seek alignment on their standards, on their own policies by other countries through the medium of such agreements. You can see its reflection in many of these earlier reciprocal trade deals. I think we should avoid them. And particularly, I would flag areas relating to economic security. Certainly, we should coordinate to the extent that it is mutually helpful. Yeah. But to align our policies with those of some other country whose interests may be somewhat different, and we are living in a totally different region altogether, these are something that should be in the policy, realm of national policy space. and should not be sacrificed for these bilateral trade. So that is something that our trade negotiators will have to be extremely watchful of when they finalize the details of the interim agreement. And again, I would add here the area of digital trade, where it is not just economic security that drives the agenda, but also the interests of the big tech, which is a very commercial objective. And there again, there are concerns regarding our privacy, our security. So those are issues that should not be compromised. And therefore, and also in terms of taxation, etc. So those are issues which we will need to be extremely careful when finalizing the interim trade deal. In any case, I think these are not issues for finalizing at the interim agreement stage level. That would be my submission.
Thank you, Saish. That's rather important, because I think we can never forget that economic, strategic, and security interests all go hand in hand, and maintaining that sovereign space to drive forward what are in India's best interests is something which we need to be very careful about while we negotiate these deals. My next question relates to the BTA. So now that the US side has secured very substantial market access commitments from us in this interim trade deal, do you think that there is still scope for them to seriously engage with us to conclude the BTA as early as possible? Because the BTA was something which was outlined in the last bilateral summit in February last year as an important goal, and the framework or the terms of reference were already set almost a year ago. So what is the prognosis looking forward?
Yes, this is certainly an area of concern also, because I hope the market access that we eventually put down in writing in the interim agreement still leaves enough scope for concessions to be given later at the stage of the bilateral trade agreement finalization. Yes, there are certain issues which will not form part of the interim agreement, such as, for example, the whole trade in services has not been covered in the interim agreement. This is only goods, largely. Likewise, government procurement has not been covered in this agreement so far. But that said, that still leaves not full space that you would require for a negotiator to be able to, in turn, ask for substantial tariff reduction from the present 18% or whatever to come down to much lower levels. So this is very, very important. Therefore, we will have to, because let's be clear, this interim agreement finds no mention of the movement of professionals. So, which is again an important issue for us. And hopefully that will be addressed at the stage of the interim agreement, at the BTA stage. Likewise, another important issue on which we are seeking progress is on the totalization agreement conclusion, which again would significantly improve bilateral trade and services. So there are a number of areas in which we have also demands which have not been addressed at this stage. So my only hope is that there is sufficient substance for both sides to look forward to in terms of carrying forward this discussion into a successful BTA. We do not know when, but hopefully soon.
All right. So now I come to what is my last question, but it's also an important question. And as you know, Saish, there is a certain diplomatic threshold which always exists, which is that stable relationships are normally based on mutual trust and shared benefits. So, going forward, how do you see, or what do you see being the direction of Indian policy towards the diversification of trade partnerships, towards the mitigation of geoeconomic risks? Where are we moving? Where are we headed? Are we really now going to be looking at a much more diverse basket of partnerships across the globe?
That is the feeling I get. And it's interesting to look in this backdrop, the FTA evolution story. The 2001-2011 decade, the impulse, political impulse for FTA making mainly came from activist policy. And that saw a number of FTAs being signed with East Asian and Southeast Asian countries. During the next decade, there was almost a pause. 2011 to 2020, no new FTAs were signed. Thereafter, we have revived this. And now, the driving element is economic complementarity. And that has driven us to conclude FTAs with countries like Australia, with the UAE, with EFTA countries, with UK, Oman, New Zealand, and most recently EU. So it gives you a totally different driving force. And if you put it all together, they account for about 50% of our exports now, and about 45% of our imports. And this does not include the US. So if you, of course, US you cannot call by any remote this is a FTA. But at least it gives more predictability and stability. And then we are negotiating also FTAs with Canada and a few more countries. So this percentage of trade coverage will widen. I think that's extremely useful, particularly in an era when you see trade fragmentation being a distinct possibility. So it gives, therefore, a certain position in terms of our exporters being able to plan, investors being able to invest, and businesses being able to carry on what they can do. I think this direction is very positive, and I hope we move forward further in this direction, even as I hope BTA comes to fruition in a mutually satisfactory way.
Good to hear that, and I entirely endorse your view that these diversified trade partnerships and risk mitigation strategies go hand in hand. And hopefully we are becoming a bigger player year by year in the global trade scene. So thank you very much, Seish. I've really enjoyed this discussion with you. I hope our viewers will also gain from it. Thank you for joining this discussion.
Thank you.